During the summer of 2020, I had an online friend who I would talk to every day for a couple hours or so. We didn't know each other in person, but we both bonded over our love of cartoons and, more so, our experiences being queer people online. She was the first person online who I considered myself a close friend with. I would talk to her about my troubles, she would talk about hers, we made pick crews together, and I told her about a fair amount of projects I was working on, and generally, I was willing to do anything that made her happy. Which is why when she recommended I watch The Owl House, I, somebody who isn't a big fan of Disney, decided to take up the offer. At the point she had told me to watch it, the first season was in hiatus, so I just watched the first half of the first season. Now, this was 2 years ago, and honestly, I wouldn't be able to tell you how or when I watched the first episode. Just that my first impression of it was that it wasn't as good as I expected. Don't get me wrong, the message that being weird is okay is a message that I like, when done correctly. I was always the weird kid growing up, and it caused a lot of issues in my life. I felt alone, and I felt like what makes me happy won't bring me the ultimate joy of friends. For a fairly long time, I pretended to be into other people's interests more than I was into my own. It led to a horrible identity crisis that spanned ages 7 to 11, and I'm still dealing with the repercussions of it. Even now, the energy of constantly knowing you are still considered an outcast and learning to be happy where you are, as opposed to trying to fit the status quo, is still an ongoing thing for me. Hell, it's why I love being online and meeting people like that friend, and then inevitably broke up with my old friend group back in March of this year, because the truth of the matter is that being weird is okay, but a lot of people don't want it to be okay. It's a complicated issue, and that's why I felt underwhelmed with the first episode. It was blunt, and it essentially had a hard problem solved a little too easily for my tastes. And yeah, I enjoyed the show more with the introduction of Amity Blight because she was a character I related to more than the others, and I especially loved Lumity, but that pales in comparison to the adoration I have for the Emperor's writing. As a writer, I tend to notice things others may not notice, or things they do but only think of on a surface level. This is stuff like the items the characters are drawn to, color changes within the characters, whether a character's hands are in their pockets, just stuff like that. But I especially notice the characters in relation to each other, so obviously Belos and Luz were a goldmine for me. The thing that makes them special is that they are opposites in almost every single way. Luz is optimistic, she's a people pleaser, and she always forgives others for their wrongs and blames herself when things go wrong. She is naturally selfless, naturally compassionate, and naturally empathetic. She is the embodiment of light, one could say. Belos, on the other hand, is egotistical, full of hatred, and manipulates others to fulfill the bulk of his evil deeds. He is naturally selfish, naturally heartless, naturally apathetic, the whole deal. They do have one similarity, though, and that similarity is that they are both humans. They both represent humanity. Luz the good, Belos the bad. They are truly built to be each other's foils within the story, to contrast each other, the extreme of opposite ends. So, what happens when the girl who believes everybody has good in them meets the personification of evil? What happens when the man who thinks all things magic are evil meets a girl who finds wonder and comfort in this magical world? Well, to answer that question, let's look at Belos before he was Belos, when he was Philip. The hints throughout Belos' mindscape seem to imply that Philip is the younger brother to Caleb, and that they grew up idolizing witch hunters, most likely living in a Puritan type of community. I think with the historic events surrounding those believed to be capable of magic getting murdered, regardless of if there's a reason to believe it's true or not, it's no secret that these types of people are not exactly appreciated, at least in this time frame of the world. But there seems to be hints that Caleb had an affinity for the Boiling Isles and the peoples of it. So, what went right with him and wrong with Philip? Well, answering that from a purely psychological standpoint is going to be impossible. And a lot of factors that would have gone into this are we would need to know a whole lot more about both of them. But for the purposes of today's video, we will be discussing why on a surface level, and not the exact causes of why. Besides, I don't think the specifics are all too important anyway. I think that, obviously, despite Caleb also seemingly growing up inspired by witch hunters, he appears to have more of an affinity. Some saying he might have even married the witch shown throughout the memories. Philip, on the other hand, is close-minded. This is what separates them. This is what makes them such different people. Just the fact that one was open to change and the other wasn't. One chose to give in to love, as foreign as it was, while the other continued to hate. And it's here that you can truly appreciate the message of the Owl House. The message goes far deeper than being weird is okay. That is merely a candle flame compared to the molten sun that is the true message of this show. What the show really describes is the many new situations that come with change and being exposed to that of which you just aren't familiar with. The specific change the show delves into is the change of reality, to learn that what you thought to be true is in fact not. The confusion, the emotions, the new, the old. No matter how much experience you have in any field, your world is flipped upside down. You're back to square one, clueless, vulnerable. Do you allow the new to overtake the old? Even if it means everything you know collapsing? A tower you built so high falling to rubble? It's scary when what you know is questioned. It's even worse to think you could have been wrong, especially when, like the Whittlebane brothers, you might have been willing to go to extreme lengths for these beliefs. Luce was never afraid of the reality of the demon realm in the way the Whittlebane brothers were, or at least that Philip was. She was never willing to kill. I think this is what separates Luce and Caleb, which is a bold claim considering we know far more about Luce than we do Caleb. I know this video is primarily focusing on how Belos is Luce's foil, but I want to take a moment to think about Belos and Caleb's connection. While Belos and Luce are contrasts, Caleb and Philip are two sides of the same coin. You know that one Skyrim quote where Parthenax says, "What is better, to be born good or to overcome your evil nature through great effort?" I think that sort of defines the difference between Luce and Caleb. Luce was born good. She was always just a ball of sunshine. A ball that felt the need to hide its light, but it was there regardless. While we don't know what Caleb's personality was like as a child, we do know he was inspired by witch hunters. He was inspired by hate, molded by it. But when he came to the demon realm, he decided to change. Maybe because he fell in love with a witch. Maybe the beauty of the Isle struck him. Maybe he just realized he was plain wrong. But no matter what, hate isn't an easy thing to overcome. That takes a long time to get rid of, especially if you learned it as a child, if it made you who you are. Caleb wanted to give in to this love and change. It's hard to change. It's hard to become a better version of yourself. It's hard to go toe-to-toe with your flaws. It's hard to embrace the truth, especially when the truth is not your truth. It's that battle within yourself, that man versus self, that allows you to truly grow and become stronger as a person. Younger, you may not be proud of who you become, but if the current version of you could explain why you're changing was for the better, and the younger you could genuinely understand that, then you did something right. And just looking at Caleb, he's so happy and full of love. He even accepts Philip despite his palisman eating going on. That would be something that would probably disgust a lot of the humans and witches, if not horrify them. But Caleb accepts him, because it's his little brother. You can just tell from the way Caleb looks that he's so full of charisma and wishes only the best for others. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the reason Caleb died. I mean, he was a former witch hunter, of course he could fight back. Philip really put him in a position where he had to. But I doubt Caleb had any intention to kill his brother. He probably went for a defense-only strategy, trying to talk to Philip. Even if he did fight back, he probably went out of his way to make sure none of his blows were lethal. But Philip didn't care. It didn't change him. He killed Caleb ruthlessly and then lied about it in his journal. He knew what he did was wrong, evil, vile, but he probably thought, the ends justify the means. Besides, Caleb is the one who betrayed me. It's really his fault he got killed. And even here, even after all this, he still loves Caleb. It's really undeniable. He could have picked anybody to be his little soldier boy, but he chose his brother. He chose to clone his brother over and over. Why? Why does he keep doing it, knowing he'll be betrayed every time? Because Caleb was all he had. Caleb was the only person who knew the real him. So why choose some random to be his golden guard when he could choose Caleb? He can have a do-over. Caleb can keep loving him over and over, because that's who Caleb is. He's the love to Belos' hate. He can forget Caleb completely, or he can make Caleb who he wishes he could have been. He can have what he views are the best parts of Caleb. He can have that love for Philip and mold him to hate the witches. But Caleb and his clones, or Grimwalkers, won't become Belos' desired version, because that's just who Caleb is. He was born into hate, but overcame it. His Grimwalkers were created to be hateful, but he'll always find that compassion deep within his soul every time, because that's who he is. It's the same love that allowed him to accept Philip that leads him to love the witches every single time. But Belos doesn't realize this. He doesn't care. So instead of considering he's betrayed because he's a horrible man who does horrible things, he decides the Grimwalkers are the problem. Because he doesn't like change. And if he's right, then they have to be wrong. And if they're right, he's wrong. They can't both be true. It would contradict. That's how it goes. That's how it has to be. The realization that led Caleb to choose love is what leads Belos to choose hate over and over again. It should also be noted that Belos is an unreliable narrator, especially in regards to why he acts the way he does. So when he sees the Grimwalkers betrayed him, I don't believe they ever truly betrayed him, especially when you look at how he called Hunter a betrayer. In his mindscape, Hunter didn't go against him. He just asked for the truth. At most, all he asked was, why? Why do this? That isn't a betrayal. That isn't going against Belos. That's just asking Belos why. Why lie? If to beg for the truth is to betray, Belos really does understand what he's doing is wrong to some degree, which is why he needs the Golden Guard. It's why he needs Caleb, because Caleb knew who the real Philip was, and even after Philip became a monster, he wanted to embrace him with open arms. It's the only real organic love he was ever truly offered, and he needs it. He needs it because he knows he's wrong. He needs support because he doesn't want to succumb. He doesn't want his tower to fall, so he won't let it. He chooses to refuse the truth, which is why Hunter asking for the truth was a betrayal to him. He himself refuses the truth, so why should Hunter, the one who should only play the role of moral support, want it? Sure, Philip is sadistic and probably takes pleasure in killing the Grimwalkers, but maybe he doesn't do it because he feels betrayed by Caleb. Maybe it's because it feels like he's killing a part of himself. Like I've kept saying, Caleb is the love to Philip's hate. Caleb embraced love. He embraced the truth. But that's what got him killed. Because he loved Philip too much. He loved too much because he believed in the hope of love too much, and it killed him. He lost Belos won. So to constantly kill the Grimwalkers for questioning the truth, the questions that allowed Caleb to come to the answer of love, is like a reminder that Caleb lost, that love lost, that the truth lost. So he's going to win. What he's doing is right. If he's gonna win, right? The ends justify the means, right? But here's where I think the symbolism of the Grimwalkers come in. Yeah, the Grimwalkers are all basically clones of Caleb, but Caleb isn't getting revived. It's more his spirit getting revived. His love. Love is always there. Where there is hate, love finds a way. It may have to find itself, but it'll always be there. Even if it has to be reborn anew, even if it has to replay the same story over and over, it will always come back. Even if Belos doesn't understand why, even if he takes sadistic pleasure in killing it, it won't give up. So now, on to Luce. Sure, Caleb and Philip represent two sides of the same coin, taught to hate, but they would still be able to choose between love or hate. They still had a choice. Luce wasn't taught to hate, but she was taught to hide who she is. She was taught that who she is cannot live in this society that just doesn't accept being that way as normal. So, she finds the Boiling Isles. She's still somewhat of an outcast, but not because of what she likes, just because she's human. But she finds people who accept her for who she is. People love her for who she is. People who fight for her, and she fights for them. Even in this world, there are issues, but those issues are because of a human who is not her. A human who is filled with an insatiable hatred. a human that does not accept differences, the manifestation of why she was bullied for who she is, why she felt like an outcast. So, here we have a human who believes in the good of everyone, and a human who forces himself to be irredeemable. There are a lot of ways this story could be taken. Perhaps by the end, Luce could teach him to embrace the love Caleb had to symbolize that even the worst can be redeemed. Or maybe she still can't, and it's useless to symbolize that you can only help people to the extent you let them. Either way, this dynamic, when done right, as it has been so far, can truly lead to a fantastic takeaway, which I will not decide what that takeaway could be until after the end of Season 3, but after Season 3 ends, I will definitely talk about it. Anyways, I will say that the Collector, as fantastic as he seems so far, just doesn't do it for me in the way that Belos does. And I think explaining that will help further my point. So, the Collector, child of the stars. God, if he was the youngest sibling. Just a brat, really. Which, cool, I guess. Don't get me wrong, the Collector does seem like a good character, but as an antagonist, just doesn't really have that same spark that Belos had. Luce is still the protagonist, and I suppose if Luce takes a more serious demeanor next season, which could very well be the case, then the Collector could be a good foil. But it's like, Belos is the foil right now, you know? So, I definitely have hope that the Collector is going to be a fantastic villain. But as of now, I think that as a contrast to Luce, Belos is perfect. I think that if Caleb and the Grimwalkers represent love, Luce represents hope. I know from a surface view, it seems like Luce could be a better fit to symbolize love, but again, as we mentioned with Caleb, he makes more sense because of the stuff. You saw the video, I'm not explaining it all over again. Obligatory mention that everything in this video is my opinion of interpretation, and if you really do think Luce could make more sense as love, go for it, dude. But this is my video, and I'm talking about my interpretation. So we will stick within my interpretation. Though another obligatory mention, more than one thing can symbolize the same thing. Luce can represent love to an extent, and Caleb can represent hope to an extent, but the core symbolism should stay the same for storytelling purposes. Well, more for simplicity purposes. Realistically speaking, everything can represent everything to an extent, but that would be such a long, far more complicated explanation for this video. In reference to other characters, a foil should represent the opposite, is my point. Editing, so I meant to say that... Oh, that's an otter. That's so cute. I meant to say that a foil could be either a complement or an opposite. They could be both. But the point of a foil is to emphasize the other character's traits, which is why they go together, because they emphasize each other's traits. So it could be argued that Caleb and Luce are both foils to Belos, but because we actively see Luce, in action, sort of, that's why I consider her a foil to Belos more than I consider Caleb one, because he essentially only acted as, I don't know the word right now, I'm sorry, but he was a very short-term thing in terms of basically just being there so that the Grimwalkers could have something to stand on and mean more, you know? So just because I know that hope is sort of vague, I will clarify. Caleb represents love. Luce represents hope in all things good, but also hope in love. So see how that has multiple meanings but relatively sticks to the same topic while meaning more than one thing? It's very straightforward in my head, but that's because I know what I'm talking about. I've taken note about how a lot of people have said that with the two learning glyphs, it's like the Titan was hiding the glyphs as best as it could from Philip. He had to work harder to find them. Luce discovered it almost immediately compared to him. He had intentions to hurt the inhabitants. Luce was just curious and wanted to be able to master magic. Not because she wanted to hurt anybody, but because the idea excited her. Another example of how they are foils. So, going back to Philip's hatred and why it's important to the story, I'd just like to bring up how in the finale of the second season, there was a point when Philip offered to take Luce through the portal with him, and, she points out that the world is completely different and nothing like he remembered, and he's just shocked, like, oh shit, you're right. And it's crazy because he doesn't really know what to do. It's a thought Luce is able to use to distract him, but the truth is that it shouldn't have distracted him at all. He should have had a plan. Why would he work to return if he didn't even know what was next? He was so caught up in his hatred, so caught up in this empire he had built, so caught up in working to destroy it. He worked so hard, but he doesn't even know what's next. Because his hate consumed him to such an extent that that's where his plans end. He worked so hard to not change the way he thought, not change who he is, that by the time he got the chance to return where he wanted to go, his home had moved on. He truly has no place in the present anymore because he's so caught up in the past, so caught up in refusing to change, so caught up in staying the same that the place the world is now is no place for him. And I think that this really encapsulates everything perfectly. It ties it up in a neat little bow. The overall theme of the show is about the new situations that come with change. But one of the main ideas we leave with is that when the world changes, you have to change with it, or else you'll get left behind. Besides, if staying the same means dwelling within hatred, is it even worth it to stay the same? I'll just leave you with all of that because I don't want to say anything else for sure until the next season is done so that we have a better idea of what the overall ideas are behind all this. This was a video that I was way more passionate about than I thought I would be when coming up with the idea for it, and it really surprised me. It was like the words I typed on screen transferred directly from my brain, and it was just so, I don't know. I really enjoy analyzing stories like this, and I hope to do more in the future. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like or dislike, whichever you fancy. Subscribe if you want to see more, and with that, I hope you have a fantastic day.